We are thankful to have non-gaming VR team here to all together at once for the first time in more than a year to help organize this alongside Jennifer and folks at the Vive side. And the topic tonight is very meaningful, at least personally to me, and I think to many of you here. Education, right? This is kind of really the future, and how can we really fulfill that potential of leveraging XR technologies towards the betterment and improvement of education, not just for what you might think to be traditional schools, but and kids, but also to adults for job training, for skills. We're kind of in these very different times now where the future of our workforce is a little bit, it's not as definitive as it used to be. So I think there's some really interesting questions to be answered tonight, and we have a wonderful panel representing everywhere from schools to investors to developers who have really been passionate about bringing education in VR and converging those in XR and bringing those together. So I wanted to introduce, starting from the far end, Mark Anderson, who is the co-founder and president of Lifelike. So Lifelike is an education platform for students where they learn visually in digital 3D. They distribute the world's largest digital science library available in interactive 3D models in both augmented reality, virtual reality on the HTC Vive, and mixed reality on the Microsoft HoloLens. Mark focuses on expanding Lifelike's learning experiences into schools and libraries, and he's one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. So very happy to have Mark here. Next to Mark, we have MADDIE. MADDIE Calendar is the Director of Operations at Boost VC, the VR and blockchain accelerator and pre-seed fund in Silicon Valley, located in San Mateo, and it's co-funded by Adam Draper and Brayton Williams. So there's a portfolio of, I think now you said 280 emerging tech companies, which is phenomenal. So thank you for helping to build this ecosystem. Boost VC is making sci-fi a reality. I like that. Next, we have Tom Impolomeni. Sorry if I'm butchering your name. The co-founder and CEO of Tribe XR. Is that correct? Yes. Okay. So Tribe XR, which I have a demo out here as we do with Lifelike and for Forge FX, is the immersive skills training platform. Tom is an experienced startup founder and operator, having built and co-founded various high-growth tech startups, including Super Awesome. And if you ever want to use your skills to learn how to DJ, Tribe XR is the way to go. It's pretty incredible. Next, we have our education true expert representing on the board here, AZINE DAVOUDZADEH. So AZINE is a dynamic educator, creator, and thought leader. She's been teaching for over a decade and is the founder of XR EDU. She has been researching and using VR in the classroom, so she's really been putting kind of the practice of VR into her teachings since 2016, and has taught intro to VR classes for the Imagineering Program in San Ramon, right in the East Bay. Her recent venture, XR EDU, is dedicated to creating XR tools for the classroom, as well as producing unique EdTech events to unite educators and technologists. And she previously led the group EdTech Connect, which produces several EdTech events in the SF Bay area. And last but not least, we have Greg Myers. Greg Myers is the CEO and co-founder of Forge FX Simulations, a software development company based here that specializes in development of custom 3D training simulations. So Greg has been overseeing the development of software apps for over 20 years, working on everything from simulation training programs to video games to internet applications. And currently Forge FX is experiencing a high demand for virtual reality-based training simulators, one of which is right outside here, which you should definitely all try. They all allow for a considerably higher degree of immersion and interactivity. So just please help me welcome the panel here. So I just wanted to kind of start it off, right? We kind of look at VR, XR, we kind of look at sci-fi that MADDIE's helping to bring to reality. And we think about the Matrix, right? That's a very kind of common reference point. So in the Matrix, Neo is able to learn Kung Fu in an instant. And then he's in a virtual reality space and he's doing Kung Fu the way that all of us would dream to do. So we're not quite there yet. So I wanted to kind of ask the panel, just to kick it off, where along that progression line are we? So Greg, you're nodding your head.
Okay, yeah, I'll take that one. I'm not sure we're quite up to where Nero was, but we're definitely getting there, and we see all the building blocks being put in place. One of the experiences that we've been developing simulations for 15 years, is that we were developing simulators way before VR was available to the average consumer. And so we built a lot of simulators that were just on flat screens that were effective, but, were limited. And then once we shifted to VR, we took the exact same simulators, put them into VR, we saw just an incredible growth in the trainee. The trainee was able to not just understand how the controls worked, but now was able to start understanding how the spatial awareness challenges worked, how fluid dynamics actually sprayed in space, and all of these other features that are really important to the job process on top of just using the equipment. And so we really saw people get into VR and within, hours be better than trainers, than operators who had been doing it for 10, 15 years. And so that was our aha moment, really, that this has a power, to educate people at a level that just hadn't existed before.
How about you, Tom? What's your thought there?
So we always use that as a reference point internally at Tribe, that we want to be the sort of DJ equivalent to that with our first skills use case. We Tribe, for those of you that haven't tried it yet, we train people on real equipment, but in VR, and then we take them out of VR and we put them on real equipment, and they have a I know Kung Fu moment where what was previously intimidating isn't, and it's like a little example of the power of VR. So yeah, we have a slide in our pitch deck that has Neo in it, so I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you.
Yeah, and I can add on to that, but I think part of what Neo, in that moment, when he gets injected with the skills of Kung Fu, he now has memories of doing Kung Fu and actually knows how to do it. So what is really cool about VR is the storytelling aspect. So I'm not just jumping into VR to automatically immediately know something. I'm now creating memories around a skill or a type of movement or learning to DJ, that now when I walk away, I now have that memory embedded, even though I haven't physically done it in real life. So it's cool to start seeing that narrative form start to be a quicker memory setting.
So I'm in schools and libraries every week, and what I've seen over the last couple of years with XR in classrooms and libraries is it totally depends on the student population. So for general education students, it's great for helping them understand difficult concepts. So they will be using textbooks very commonly, and I still read hard books and hardcovers and still love them, but we just want XR to get their due. But what will happen is students will say, well, I looked at an image, a 2D image here, and then another one next to it from a different angle of a blood vessel, and then a third, and they have to conceptualize it in their mind, and they just get it wrong, as students tell us all the time. So it can't be a surprise for us. We live our lives in 3D. Can't be a surprise for us that our brains learn better in 3D. And that's what we're seeing from students all the time. So when they enter XR, general ed students are able to understand concepts because they're experiencing them. And they're doing that in live. I didn't know who was going to be here tonight, so they don't know I'm going to mention their names. John McLeod is here. John and Sarah Jones and others, but they were the two leaders that are putting 200 VR systems into over 100 public libraries across the state of California. That's the type of innovation that's going on, and 100 of those are Vives. That's the type of innovation that
110 actually.
And Chris didn't even correct me. It wasn't. I didn't start that off as a sales pitch, so sorry. And Dane Lancaster is a tech leader for Marin County Office of Education. And we've worked, thanks to Dane, with the Marin Community School in San Rafael. This is at-risk students. Okay, at-risk students are they have a different experience than the general population students, and different than the students who are in Title I schools. With the at-risk students, what Dane set up was lifelike on a Vibe. There was also a Rift there that day. There was Google Tilt Brush and one or two other things. the teachers told us beforehand, number one, you're going to have these students are going through trauma in their lives, so real trauma. Some of them have been abused. Some of them are one step away from juvenile school. Some have just come out of juvenile hall. And Dane set up this day for them, and the teacher said, expect about 3 students there, maybe 4. All 15 showed up. And I asked the teacher, what's going on? She goes, well, we made the decision to tell them today's Learn an XR day. They all wanted to be there. And the last thing that happened that day, too, that was incredible, was the teacher said, Mark, expect just no engagement. School's the last place in the world a traumatized student wants to be. And those students were as engaged that day as any students that I've ever seen. I'm in the poorest and the richest schools every week. I'm in schools where parents are paying $40,000 a year at an independent school. Those students, at the at-risk student that Dane set up that day, they were as engaged as any students you'll ever see.
That's amazing. Thank you. AZINE, and the front lines of the classroom as well. I mean, I know Mark gets to a lot of different classrooms, but how do you see that, where we are in that spectrum between now and the future state for NEO? And what kind of impacts do you see that XR is having in your classroom?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I did my master's thesis on VR in education, and particularly we know that there is a disproportionate amount of males to females in the tech industry. So I wanted to focus in on my female students and see if XR, and speaking of engagement, right, if XR, specifically VR, could impact their interest levels. And so I ran an experiment, and lo and behold, at the end of it, there's a statistically significant jump in the girls' interest in pursuing careers in technology. I'd love to follow up with them to see if they actually pursue it, but I think that this technology is different than any other computing platform in that it reaches everybody. There's no color lines, it's time and space doesn't even exist in some sense. And so I think that what makes it different because of the experiential aspect can reach a greater amount of people, that you wouldn't typically think would be into it. Right. So that's one of the impacts that I saw in my classroom.
Yeah, I think when we talked the other night, you were also mentioning another experiment you're doing in XR that had to do with the girls in your classroom and the boys.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, and then that was 2 years ago. And then last year I brought in my Vive, and this wasn't necessarily, it was just sort of a natural thing that happened. I said, oh, who wants to try it, and line up or put your names on the board. And all the boys rushed and just put their names. And then the girls were very reluctant. And so they were sitting back. Oh, no, I don't want to do it. It's okay. And it sort of made me sad because I'm thinking, no, you should go first. So, but then again, we also discussed that hopefully teachers can, and everyone in the room who maybe has an impact or a hand with a student can kind of like break the barrier of not having those social norms of like supporting just the boys necessarily. And it could be totally subconsciously, but maybe having more support towards encouraging girls to try XR. And so I had to encourage them, and eventually they tried it, but yeah.
And then after that, what was the result?
Oh, and then they loved it. And they were like, oh, Miss D, we're gonna try this all the time. So I think that as soon as they try it, they love it, but they need to get over the hurdle of the just sort of being shy about it.
So just one piece of advice on that too, for anyone who is trying to get friends or family into VR, Vive has an option where you can turn the camera on so that if you walk to the edge of the boundary, the camera turns on, you can see the people around you. I found that I felt very self-conscious in VR. So I've been playing in VR for over 3 years. And when I first started playing in VR, I was in a room full of guys, and I would put on a headset and I felt very, very vulnerable. And that vulnerability was very overwhelming. And like, I would feel very uncomfortable. I'd be like, okay, can someone stand and watch while like that no one comes up to me or approaches me or something when I'm in VR? Because I can't see anything around me. I don't know where I am or what's happening. And that function of being able to turn on the camera, once I figured that out, so I could kind of be immersed in this world and then kind of like look out and be like, okay, no one's taking pictures of me or like making fun of me or doing anything. Okay, I can go back into VR and have fun. And so that type of little thing I think is really important to be able to share and get more people into VR, and to be able to build that trust with the community that you're in and the environment that you're in. And just that was one little piece of advice.
That's a great point. And I think that's a really valid one around just the bias or almost the social stigma that you might feel, especially at certain ages between boys and girls. So just kind of sticking in the classroom setting for a while, what technology in general has been pervasive in education? You had things like computers first and then iPads and tablets, Chromebooks, but what's different about VR or an XR this time around in the education cycle for these new technologies? Maybe Zine, if you want to.
Yeah, I'd love to start. I think that it's different because it creates presence, and before XR, if you will, and more specifically, I think VR, the computing platforms were just this thing, right? It's an object in front of you that you interact with, but is no longer VR a thing. It's an experience. It's a reality, right? You go into another reality. And so I think that's the hugest impact, and that's why it's so different than all the other computing platforms.
So, and maybe Maddie, you might be able to add some perspective here, because EdTech is traditionally very hard to invest in, right? There's been a lot of stories where you get companies getting millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet they're not able to really fulfill the promise of what the investors are looking for. So do you see XR being any different from an investor standpoint in terms of impacting education?
So the education piece, at least in the US, is tricky because you have different types of schools and different types of people paying. So the biggest piece from an investor perspective is where is the money coming from to be able to get your system either in the school. And I think that actually brings up the question of how should education work and where is VR the most useful in terms of education. In the school, with the social environment that you're with your peers, you're learning from your peers, you're learning from your teachers. Maybe that's not the best place for VR, but maybe it's in an after school care program, or maybe it's at home and you do your homework in VR. Like where does VR fit into the spectrum, and how do we make sure that it fits into the piece of the puzzle where people are going to pay for it? Because that is a big piece of how do we get the hardware in the classroom, how do we get the hardware in the after school care programs. Paying the money side of it is the biggest question of how do you get people able to start learning and being educated in this unique fashion.
Yeah. And Tom, I think you've had background with kids with Super Awesome, right?
Sure. So a little bit, yeah. So Super Awesome's the biggest kids and family sort of network, if you like, in the world. So we have COPA compliance for companies like Roblox and Mattel and Hasbro and so on. And I'm also an advisor to a company called FireTech Camp in the UK, which is coding camps for kids. So I sort of have a bit of knowledge in this area. But I would definitely say, like, one of the things that we think about a lot is when we talk about schools, it's kind of an archaic concept, because the principle of everyone sort of traveling, going to a classroom, sitting there passively and listening, and then everyone being assumed to learn at the same rate is that's from the 1800s. And so schools have moved forward, but there's an assumption that we'll still kind of travel. And actually one of the powers in VR is that you don't need to do that. So all of a sudden, and one of the things we're looking at is, can we connect teacher and student no matter where they are? And it's easy when you're in San Francisco to think, we've got access to everything. But if you're in, I don't know, North Africa or somewhere that, where you don't necessarily have a local pool of teachers to teach you in the skills that you want, your current options are to go online and teach yourself, or to sign up for a course, but then that's mainly video content. And so where we think it's interesting is that VR allows you to get in a room with a teacher, to practice things that aren't necessarily taught very well by video, and it really just opens up education to the world. So I think it's part of a broader rethink of the whole structure of education.
Right. That's a great point. And your experience is all about that. It's all about having the teacher live with you, explaining to you, answering questions, and guiding the student, right? It
is. And it's, in a way, that's one way to solve a problem.
Yep.
And, we think a lot about, is it best one-to-one, one-to-many? What are the best ways to teach? I think that's where, working on a project and a product like tribe is really interesting because you get to think about how do we teach more effectively. And I think, one of the things we were talking about before is when we talk about I know Kung Fu, the magic of Neo was, he plugged in or he took a pill and then bang, he knows Kung Fu. And we're not there, but you can teach quicker using, repetitions on a regular, so if you're operating an oil rig, you don't have to go to an oil rig to practice. You can practice at home, or, if you're repeating things over and over, if you're basically learning spatially, that has been proven again and again to be a quicker way to learn. So I think that's how we kind of see this fitting. So it's in a way, it's just improving the speed at which we learn.
And that's a good segue into what exactly you're doing, Greg, which is you're bringing the rig to you. You're not actually bringing people, flying them all over to training centers across the country, right?
Yep, exactly. I mean, that hits really on what JLG is interested in. And so the JLG simulator that we built is out in the demo area, and they have a conundrum where they are flying people all across the world into Pennsylvania to train on this specific equipment. They're putting them up in hotels. It's just an inordinate amount of money that they're spending. And they're finding that the simulators that we can put them all around the world, people can train individually, as well as it's a multi-user application. So you can have a trainer right in your ear, and you can actually see them and feel like they're in the basket with you training, and you haven't left. You can be in Barcelona, the trainer can be in Pennsylvania, and it's as if he's right there in the basket with you. And it's just, that is something that industry, the enterprise space is really interested in, because it's just going to save them billions.
So that kind of, I think we're on a common theme here around kind of synchronous training, right? So both Tom with Tribe and Greg with ForgeFX, you guys are doing synchronous training. So how do you guys scale, right? If it's synchronous training, you're implying 1-to-1 or 1-to-5 or maybe 1-to-many. But how do you pitch that versus non-synchronous training, recorded training, or single-player training, if you will?
So we think about it a few different ways. Synchronous training it's easier to match 1-to-1 when it doesn't matter where your tutors are in the world than if you have to go to a local studio and then you're using only a local talent pool, if you like. So that's one benefit. The second thing is there's different approaches to synchronous training. So when we think about group training, we also think about sort of hybrid. So recorded training where you also have an assistant. So where you get stuck, you hit a button and then the assistant comes and helps you. Now that's like a commonly followed practice online already. If you get stuck in a sales process on Amazon, or Amazon's probably not a good example, but there'll be a little face that pings up and goes, hey, what's up? And so it's like that. So you can harness these technologies in different ways. But yeah, we definitely think it's eminently scalable because it's global.
I would add one thing, in that this is maybe a step further past training, and that's that a lot of our clients are interested in remote operation, right? Training is important, but also they see VR as a method to doing remote operation. So why do I have to put a man at 185 feet or a woman at 185 feet? Why can't he be in VR or she be in VR operating the simulator? And if that's the case, well, why can't that person be living somewhere where the wages are much lower and operating a piece of equipment where the wages are higher? So I can hire operators who are living in, other parts of the world where wages are way cheaper, but they're operating a vehicle here in the US. And so that's where we see the scale really going past training and into operation.
So kind of across the board, what results have you actually seen in terms of XR impacting education, in terms of basically improving test scores or improving memory or improving, obviously, the engagement? Both you guys were all talking about the engagement side of things, but maybe Mark, on your side, have you seen any kind of results across different populations? I think you mentioned certainly the children at risk, and there are others as well, I'm sure, too.
We have, and we've seen it in multiple areas. So for us, with general education students, we have, first of all, just either reported data from the classrooms or schools that we work with, as well as our own internal data, just showing where we see increased recall among students. and as well as from the schools saying that they are having increased learning outcomes. Additionally, there was a study that's about to come out. Dr. Richard Lamb at the University of Buffalo did a study where it was using lifelike on a Vive, as he also used serious educational games and 1 or 2 other formats. And this is a 35-page paper that's about to come out. And what he found in that, he was doing using MRIs, functional MRIs, as part of that testing process. And one thing that he has found or proven, if a student is picking up, say, a plastic heart in the classroom, certain parts of their brain are firing. If they're picking up that heart in virtual reality, the same parts of the brain are firing. So what he was able to conclude is that they are experiencing it as real. So this is really a great implications for education. We're also just starting with Stanford Research Institute another research project over the next month.
How about AZINE?
Yeah. Actually, I was going to say that same study that I did with the females, I used a writing sample. So what I did was I had them write pre-VR and then use VR and then do another writing sample. And their writing, actually, the level of description, I mean, it's not surprising, but it went way up. I mean, the number of adjectives they used increased. In fact, the number of paragraphs decreased. So it kind of led me to believe it was more quality versus quantity, whereas before they were writing a lot, but it was just sort of didn't make sense or didn't have as much description. So I think in that regard, as far as learning outcomes, that's one piece of evidence that I've seen in my own classroom, besides engagement, of course.
I played a lot of like Jumpstart, which is a computer game that was a CD-ROM thing that you played when you were a kid, and it was like something your parents bought as like after school you pretend like you're playing a game but you're actually learning something. And I think that was kind of a magical like experience for me in even though we're talking non-gaming, I was actually learning math. I was learning how to put parts together. I was conceptually like playing with this. And we look at the market size of the Lumosities out there, or the different like brain training apps, or the Calm, or the relaxation side of like all the stuff that we can do to improve our mental health and wellness, and or amplify our capabilities and actually train our brains to be doing things faster, smarter, better. And I think that VR is the natural next step to that, because all of those apps, the Duolingos, the Lumosities, they're making us focus for a certain period of time, and they're giving us a really interactive experience. And if we can pull that into VR, and now I'm not just looking at an apple and going, manzana, this is in Spanish, I can actually take a bite out of it and be like, oh yeah, that makes apple juice, and that's jugo de manzana. I don't know, something like very simple like that. You can like actually start to see how this can learn much more quickly. Again, back to the memory piece of Neo. Now I have that memory of taking a bite of that apple and then pouring a cup of juice from the thing that came out of that apple, and I know how to make apple juice, and I've learned that. I know that skill. I know what those words are, and now I can say them in Spanish. And so just thinking more about how that immersion can actually bring that focus. I think that's one of the coolest pieces of VR is maybe over AR, is the ability to really get people focused in on one thing and learning really quickly. And then one other example that I think is fascinating is just the language side of how you learn languages with memory palaces. If you start to think about VR, you have an infinite landscape, so you can start to build spaces as big or as wide or as crazy as you want. I could recreate my childhood home and start placing parts of languages that I don't know in different rooms in my childhood home. So then when I start wanting to speak that language, I could go back and go to my childhood bedroom or into my closet and go onto the shelf in the book, where I kept my Nancy Drew novels, and like grab that part of the language and be able to recall it. So that kind of memory recall, where we now have an infinite space to actually go explore and leave different parts of memory, I think is really a unique part of VR as well.
I like it. No, I think that's great, especially about gamifying it, right? I mean, gamifying, we all know, is it's very addictive for any kind of training or simulation. So Beat Saber Espanol, or any combination, or can I learn something from Fortnite? I think my kids would love that. Yeah. So
if you combined Farmville plus like a Jumpstart, where I had to like do math to get like my plants, or get enough grain to feed my animals, like that would be an incredible VR game. Yeah.
So Tom, you're about to say something?
I was saying we're in an interesting time because, language learning. So there's a company called Memrise that I think does language training using sort of memory palace techniques. But we're in an interesting time whereby you can learn languages, but at the same time, AI is going to remove the need to know them. and so therefore, so I don't know, like there's always we're kind of thinking there's a certain change in the way that you learn, because a lot of the knowledge of the world is now on Google, and if you don't need to learn everything rote, and so almost like the nice thing about, say, VR and immersive tech is it teaches you at a top level the principles, and it can kind of remove the fear and explain complicated things in simple ways, and then that coupled with the fact that you can access any info in the world, it's an exciting time for training.
Yeah, so we should have a panel on education, fulfilling the potential of education with AI, right?
Absolutely.
What's going to win, AI or XR?
AI, VR, crypto, everything. Incentivize.
So I want to kind of shift gears a little bit around more of the challenges that we've been facing. So we're, at least I know we've gone through a few iterations of XR and VR development, but MADDIE, you've seen a lot of companies come through. Has the promise of XR in education been fulfilled this past 2.5 years, and why or why not?
I would say it hasn't yet been fulfilled. I think there's a huge opportunity that's still out there in education that needs to be fulfilled. The premise of VR and AR in the last 2.5 years has really been focused on enterprise and enterprise training. I think that is a really game-changing way to use this technology. And it's the first, if you can get companies on board, that means that employees are using the headsets, they're in a headset on a regular basis, then it comes home, and then it becomes something that's more common with your kids or your family, and it's something that you see on a regular basis. And then I think it kind of trickles down into the education side. So I think there's a huge opportunity for founders, teams, companies to be building and working on education, especially if you think a little bit more creatively about the current education system in the US, and kind of like what you were saying, kind of rethinking should we all be learning at home and then coming to the classroom to just debate it? Or when is the right time to be learning that information and be in that focused environment?
So that's kind of the IBM PC model, right? Basically, computers took hold at work, then they became personal through schools and Apple IIs coming through, or TRS-80s, if you go back then.
Yeah.
So that's kind of your sweet spot, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think that for us, VR has been super successful in training. We've just seen, that it's been able to do things that we didn't even expect in terms of, folks being able to train twice as fast in half as much time, and, knock out 80% of sort of the remedial training stuff. Do that in VR, and then you're always going to need to be in the real world to do some training. But if we can knock out 80% of that, and we're seeing, getting close to that number, then we're seeing some real benefits there. In terms of, have we really capitalized on everything it can do? I don't think so yet, just because the adoption rate isn't really quite there yet. Once it becomes easier to set up, once it becomes easier for us to deploy simulation stations, I think we'll see a much higher adoption rate. And for us, we measure it not so much on how many simulation stations do we sell, but what's the daily active user, like how many hours are people putting into a station. It's no good if they buy a simulation station, it just sits there and collects dust. We want to look at the analytics and see, okay, how many hours is this being used per day? And that's really the metric that we use.
Can I jump in for a second? So I think sort of piggybacking on what MADDIE said, you can also make a case for I think the data needs to catch up for education to be able to adopt it. It's also the bureaucracy that makes it so slow to adopt. However, if we can figure out a way, and I know we can, that a VR experience makes a teacher's job more effective, believe you me, I'm going to be buying it myself with my own money first. Then every other teacher will. And of course, if there's a case for kids learning and the data is there to support it, schools are going to adopt it, kids are going to want to use it. So, and that's like $1 trillion industry right there that impacts so many people every day. So I think that's another opportunity that we don't really look at every day because it is slow to adopt. And I think the challenge is getting the stakeholders to buy in. And that's like, the superintendents and the district level. If they buy into this, then they could easily deploy to, hundreds of schools, So that could be an opportunity too.
You look like you want to say something.
Yes. We've only had 6 VR for like 3 years, and basically no one in the world has it. The incidence rate still, even though it's amazing, is like pretty low. So like we're right at the beginning. We haven't got that much user data. There's only really been 3 years of like experimentation. Obviously there's the history beforehand. So, but for us, like it's still missing certain aspects. So, things like eye tracking are going to be really powerful. So being able to know when someone, based on like the position of the pupils, are they focused or not? Are they losing interest in what's being followed? And being able to take that data and improve the effectiveness of education. The second thing is being able to share information on the best methods or the best teachers. So that's something I think there was recently an article written on the way that the Chinese government is approaching this, and they're sharing school information, and teachers are kind of getting together and teaching best practices, and that's having an augmentative overall effect. So I think sharing that type of data on the best methods is going to improve everything. And everyone always says when you're building a startup, like, pick an enemy and go after that. We always had the enemy being this notion of 10,000 hours. You need 10,000 hours to learn a skill. And actually, if you look into the science behind that, it's kind of not really true, because some skills you can learn in 2,000 hours and some skills it will take you like 20,000 hours. But 10,000 hours is like every day for 20 years or something like that. You're doing an hour a day. And the notion that it would take you that long just seems like, for us, it's like XR offers the opportunity to shrink that. So people can get more out of their lives, and we can improve the way that people learn, and that's got to be improving the world.
Great. So I think those are great points. And AZINE was talking about also the fact that anything that will make her life easier, anything that will make a teacher's life easier. So Mark, how are you making lives easier for teachers?
Well, we've solved all the problems. Yeah, everything's, so we can all go home. So what we're doing is, I'm going to go back to here. So with at-risk students, with what Dane set up, we're making teachers working with at-risk students able to reach students or excite students that don't even want to be in the classroom. We haven't talked about special needs students and that student population. We work with special needs students every week. And we work with another extraordinary teacher. He's not here tonight, but Dan Phillips, who's up in San Rafael, the Tech Resource Center, truly a thought leader in working with special needs students. And we worked with him multiple times. What happens is we are making his job easier as a teacher because he's able to give experiences to his special needs children who could not experience that otherwise. I'll use as an example Spencer, who we worked with a couple of times, who is a teenage boy, and he is in a power wheelchair. He has muscular dystrophy, and he's nonverbal. And so he went into the same shark experience out here underwater, and so he was looking underneath, at every fish swimming by and the shark swimming by. And then I know the pacing of how quickly students kind of want to move to the next thing. He didn't want to leave that experience. And his mom was there as well. And so I asked afterwards, I said, she said this is the first time the closest he's ever come to the feeling of being under the ocean. And that can only happen in XR right now. So we're making teachers' lives easier that way, as well as the students. And then the other way that we're helping, we as a community, is his mom said to me after he came out of, we took off the Vive, and his mom said that was the best physical therapy session that he's had in the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. He didn't even know he was doing PT. Right? I mean, how extraordinary. Everyone hates doing it. My dad hated doing PT. Everyone hates PT. But if you don't even know if you're doing it, and you're excited to be doing. I mean, what advantage is that? Let alone, plus we work with autistic students. And so we make it easier for teachers of autistic children because that, AZINE mentioned earlier, presence and that feeling of immersion. Well, if we think of a loved one right now, who might be autistic, if they were with us right now, they might be really distracted by maybe the lights, disturbed, possibly, or the cameras, or there's a sound over here I'm faintly picking up. That could be very disturbing for someone who's, depending on where they are in the spectrum. But what happens is, so they are disturbed by their environment and they can't focus as a result. What happens in XR is that then that's so immersive and that feeling of presence, they're able to focus. And that may be the only 10 minutes of the day that they're able to focus and feel like they're controlling their environment. So we're helping students and teachers that way also.
It's wonderful.
Can I add? So my favorite class in high school was history, and it was because the teacher was such an incredible storyteller. So every day we would come into the classroom, and it was a U.S. history course, and he would walk through these narratives and kind of tell you about the personal lives. And he'd be talking about a president and be like, oh, he was a little heavy, and like he really liked his cigars. And he would like, it wasn't just a history class where it was like, here are the facts, here are the dates, here's what's going on. It's like you really felt like you got to know that president, and you got to know his relationship or his kids or the story behind what was happening. And I think VR is one of the most incredible storytelling applications, or storytelling is an incredible application for VR. And so it is one of those things where when we start to bring in 360 video and we start to bring in these narratives into the classroom, even in a cardboard in 360 video, being able to step foot in that place or go to that actual physical location that you've been studying in geography and see what the street corner looks like, that's a memory that you're then taking with you to that test. When you go take that test, you're like, gosh, where was that city located? Oh, I went to that capital in VR. I now remember the name of the capital. So there's a lot of things that I think are shifting very quickly, using even just as simple as 360 video, where you get to feel present like in another location.
So just have a couple more questions before I open up to the audience here. But, I think we talked about a number of different themes here. Certainly there's challenges. It's a long run play, it seems like. It's a marathon. And I know many of you have been running for a long time, very hard, as have I. But the question is, what can we do really to kind of help advance the acceleration of the industry overall? I mean, I think Tom, you touched upon some points about like some of the hardware challenges and accessibility and putting in eye tracking, et cetera. That's on us for sure, and others like us. But that will come with technology improvement and advancement. But what, as a community, can we do to really help break the barrier on things like job training in schools, skills training, and even investors?
I'll jump in real quick just because we run into this all the time. We ship a simulation station to a trade show or to an event or somewhere, and the person who's setting it up is non-technical, and they fail to set it up correctly. And we've spent 6 months, tens of thousands of dollars developing it, and that last hurdle we get to, they have trouble with the trackers, they have trouble with the base station, something fails and the simulator doesn't run. So as much as you can do to ease that setup process and make it so simple, so even if it's easy for you, make it simpler, because there are people who are setting these up all around the world that are non-technical, and if it fails, it's just a colossal failure. And we've had that experience where we've shipped a simulator and it just doesn't run because they couldn't set up, the tech.
Just going in order here, I would say that first of all, spreading awareness. So going to events like what we're at tonight, I think is super important, because then we're spreading the knowledge and the knowledge then becomes more support, right? I mean, I think for schools, funding is an issue. So that's one hurdle that we always have to overcome. So I think the more support and the more use cases and data out there for content and education, then the better we can go and say, hey, we need this and this is why, and here's the evidence. So I think just the support of people who are in the VR industry is really key for schools too.
Yeah, I think it's a big topic. We think about this as it's a huge there's a huge global opportunity here where if the content is better, if the solution to the problem is better than what exists, like people should eventually choose it. So there's that aspect. So I think what you're starting to see now in the market is better and better content. Certainly for us as a company, what we aim for is, can we teach DJing or any skills training better than what exists, cheaper, faster? Then there's the second aspect, which is if every time you turned your Sonos on, you had to calibrate every room, you wouldn't use it that much. And so every time, and we're a bunch of professionals, we go around and we show all the time, and every time you open the computer, you're like, oh, is there going to be a Windows update, an Oculus driver update, and so this is, and that can that takes us down 10% of the time. So I think it's got to be pick up and go. And so obviously the Vive Focus, the Santa Cruz, all these headsets coming out are the first step towards a consumer product. I think John Riccitello said at TechCrunch Disrupt that there hasn't really been a consumer headset launch yet. It still feels like prototypes. You guys will probably argue differently, but it definitely, we're probably a couple of turns away from an iPhone type moment, I think.
I would say that we need to be more creative about how we think about education. I don't think we need to bring textbooks as is into VR. I think we need to really think about, should we go to Williams-Salem and learn math? Why do these things need to be so separate, and why do the classrooms need to be so separate? Why don't we really think about maybe I have to do a geometry puzzle before the Salem witch trials or something. You could start to blend education and be learning really interesting things at the same time. And I think when we start to see that, which is not just a replica of what we have, I think that's the most interesting stuff that's happening in VR. Beat Saber is not something we can do in real life. We cannot go swinging lightsabers around at music notes. When we can get that type of thing in education, and that's when it starts to get really exciting, and that's when it becomes more powerful, and it drives people to go buy a headset or go put up with the flaws of the technology in the moment, because it is so unique and it is so exciting to be a part of.
So for us, I'll start kind of on the selfish side. It's just because we are platform agnostic or hardware agnostic, and everything we do in XR, we're work with multiple devices. And so for us, it is hardware adoption across all of those. And then we also need to do a better job just in terms of the content we're creating. So I don't code, I'm not an engineer, but we do have the best development team in the world of education when it comes to 3D. And that's all because of the women and men that we have in the Czech Republic. So setting that aside for a moment, though, the one thing I just wanted to mention is we need more voices. We need more diversity in our world of education. I can't speak to the other industries, but we don't have enough diversity. And so that's what I would encourage. So if you have a passion, and if you're like me, you don't code, or if you do code, even better yet, we really need you, or we need your friends or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever to create something that they're really passionate about, because there are students all around the world that need what might be the germ of an idea in your brain right now.
Okay, I have to go backwards because I didn't have my investor cap on when I was saying that last thing. We need more investors to be looking at VR too. We really do need the angel investors, the seed investors to be taking VR very seriously, because I think it has a ton of potential. And so I just need to throw that out there too. That's a big piece of that's missing.
I'd say, and governments and universities and schools, I think they're all warming up to the fact that you can grow your economy by training your people better. So educating better. And so, yeah, I think we're starting to see that. But also, so we work with music schools at the moment and soon other types of schools. And music schools, you traditionally have to go there to study. And the opportunity to broaden your reach and to use new technologies and to improve on the way that you learn, that's a big opportunity. So there's tons of other use cases. So I think it's going to be driven in part by investors, in part by governments, in part by schools.
Great. Okay, thanks. I wanted to open up to questions in the audience. So, let's see.
Thank you all. Very interesting, inspiring on many levels. I work for the largest public university system actually in the world, and it's here in California, the California State University System. And one thing that we've talked around but not about directly is not using immersive reality for education, but educating and training students to become VR, XR, AR creators, which thank you for that lead-in, because that was perfect for my question, is what about how are we going to, how we create the new content is, and the most diverse content, I work for the most diverse system in the world as well, is getting those young people creating it, interdisciplinary. I agree with you. To me, immersive reality is the most interdisciplinary anything I've ever seen in my life. It is STEAM, it is not STEM. I'm sick of STEM, I'm sick of STEM, I'm sick of STEM. It is, you're looking at something, there's art there, people. It's media and art too. So how can we all work together, public university, so it's government too, and university, create the next generation of industry leaders like yourself that are diverse storytellers.
Of course.
So I just, because I'm so passionate like you are about students being creators, I just accepted a job teaching computer science. I wasn't teaching computer science before, and I'm not a coder, by the way, but they gave me the job because I'm so enthusiastic. And I was willing to learn, and I have some background knowledge, like it's not like I'm going in blindly. But with that said, my biggest passion is giving them the tools. So I'm working right now on installing Unity on all the computers. So I want students to create for students, by students, for students. So I think how we do that is just getting teachers on board and educating other teachers about the, like, you know, the greater good of this. And so I think that's one thing that I'm doing, and I hope that other people like support that and do it as well. So if that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, there are organizations that are starting to come up, and I think Vive is involved in quite a few of them. But the VR AR Academy is a really great way for women to learn about, either with a technical background or a non-technical background, to jump in, and they have different like courses or kind of meetups where you can go learn about how do I get started? How does that work? What does that setup look like? So we're seeing more of that. A lot of the sponsored hackathons are usually bringing in, like Unity will sponsor a hackathon, and then everyone is starting to learn, and they have people there to support it along the way. I also think the high school clubs and college campus clubs starting to bring AR, VR clubs to campus is a really great way just to start having the conversation and having the people as a resource for learning about what do I need to get started.
Yeah, and we've actually piloted high schools or middle schools actually that are teaching Unity, teaching XR development, because we believe in the next generation of content creators. I mean, that has to happen. There are groups like XR Marin, which is here tonight with John and Dane. Their mission, they've been having summer camps for free. They're offering that free, and they're offering it this fall as well in their academies to train students on XR creation.
Ago, Chris Mitty and I started this up because we saw there were some gaps in the ecosystem, and I think they're still here. You know, this presentation I gave 3 years ago to this group, but it was different attendees then, and we have moved a long way. But you know, things that are missing in the ecosystem are a place to put our curriculum and our assessment tools, and to have a user database where people can go in and subscribe to training and education, and we can get their scores, and then we can go in as a teacher, you know, sort of, or an educator, or as an industrial trainer, or an HR personnel, and be able to see how well this person did and whether they need to do it again, or whether now they're allowed to go and do the work in your workplace. A place to go and buy stuff. You know, sort of, it's still not there, and Adobe spoke up, you know, and said they were going to put in an ecosystem. Still haven't seen it. I talked to Cardboard, you know, sort of, they said they were going to put it in, still not there. So the technologies have come along a long way, and you know, the beauty of the things that we see, the products are amazing, but still I think we're missing the ecosystem that will allow us then to deploy it to the community. So it'd be great to hear, you guys have got little slices, but do you see any ecosystem evolving?
In terms of, I think I'm a believer in sort of the power of the market. So one of the questions, the point that you made about encouraging people to get into VR and AR, there's a reason that at the moment that companies need funding, and it's if you build a VR product and you ship it, you might make enough to cover your student room cost. But it's not, unless you have a massive hit, it's not currently a lucrative market unless you offer an enterprise solution. But it's coming and it's growing. And I think structurally, we're in a sort of chicken and egg situation where all of the elements are coming together. And a few years down the road, I think there's going to be more sort of consumer demand and more possibilities. And therefore that's going to, in itself, going to stimulate that market. But definitely what we've seen, so I've been working in the VR market for about 4 years, and I've seen some of those gaps starting to be filled. It's easier than ever before to make a VR experience because the engines are better. There's things like blocks. You don't need to be a world-class computer scientist to make a world-class product. You can build using other people's elements. And I think the thing that excites me most is there still isn't really a global sort of VR community per se. And so, maybe the biggest structural change will be, there's a reason Facebook bought Oculus, but this notion that we can join up the world and we can all be in sort of that technology, I think that's going to be the big structural change that will underpin a lot of what's coming.
When we first started investing in VR 3.5 years ago, I guess now, we were really looking at what are the content creators going to need as tool sets. So where are the analytics platforms? Where are the Masterpiece VR, where you can actually sculpt and create objects that you can export into your 3D worlds and use them either for gaming or for world creation. Where the world building tools, the back end side of it. So that was a lot of what we were looking for, and we're still actively looking for that. The developer community needs to continue to grow to be able to support those companies. The analytics tools are kind of struggling just because there aren't enough players or enough headsets. We're not really seeing enough of the growth right now. So I think it's still coming, but the tools for helping people create content and learning the content, I think, is still a big piece of the puzzle that is being built right now. Also means we're still early, which is exciting and an opportunity.
Okay, let's go over here.
Hi. So I first want to say I'm a huge proponent of education in VR and XR, and I think it's really part of the future. But at the same time, I also have a 11-month daughter, and I was wondering if anyone on the panel knows of studies or anything in terms of what age it becomes a positive versus possibly a negative with this technology.
Well, I've worked with middle school and high school now. I personally believe, I'm not sure if there's a study, but because of developmentally, I feel like there could be a potential negative impact. I wouldn't necessarily put it on anyone that's below the age of 13. That seems to be a trend. I think a lot of the products say 13 and up. I'm not sure. But for developmental reasons, I wouldn't. And also, there's ethical considerations that I don't think we even brought up. Because if you think about it, I've been in VR for, multiple hours, and sometimes when you come out of it, you question your realities. And, I think for kids, that's really sensitive. So as educators and parents, I think it's important to make sure that it's used in a certain way, that it's not just like, there's a purpose to the reason why they're using the VR in the first place. So I've just heard 13 and up, and I'm a believer in that. I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable putting it in although people do it, but I mean, for extended use, I wouldn't put it in someone younger than 13.
Yeah, I think, so there's two, if you're under 13, there are data considerations as well. So, companies can't gather tracking data on under 13s without risking huge fines. So there's that element for the 13-year-old reason as well. That's the kind of what Super Awesome does. And but I have 3 daughters. They're 5, 2, and 1. We haven't tried on the 2-year-old and 1-year-old, but a 5-year-old loves VR, even though she's not allowed. And especially like Disney VR experiences. I just leave that there. But so I don't know. I'm an optimist when it comes to new technologies. I think if it improves their learning, then it's a good thing. Obviously, there's going to always be content that's inappropriate for young kids. So that will fall on companies, platforms, and parents to moderate that.
So we have time for one more question. So I think here, just for approximate purposes.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for talking to us tonight. I work at Stanford University, and I'm trying to bring VR into my sort of my list of technologies that I consult with different schools, departments, and areas with. And one of the challenges I struggle with most, and I imagine you do too, is we have everybody from the Graduate School of Business who sees this as a video conferencing tool, to researchers that see this as a way to share their data, to hospitals who use this as a way to maybe reduce drug load and try new and interesting things. But across all these things, there should be more in common, but I think what's missing most for me in deployments and making this a stable and scalable solution is standards. And my question for you is, if you could put the inertia of all of this our XR developers, whether that's in hardware or software or services, where do you think standards are most important right now? Realizing a balance between innovation and adoption.
Yeah, I think if you look at the history of technology over time, there have always been regulating bodies that have appeared. Whether it was on the radio, there were people that came out and started to regulate radio. On television, you have different ratings that come up either as part governmental, part education, part like its own unifying body. So I imagine that in the next, if it hasn't already been started, then in the next few years, we'll probably start to see some sort of like regulating body actually saying what is a Steam rating versus another platform rating versus I can buy it off of a website rating. Like, is there something where we need to have a consistent level of rating? I also think that ratings are going to have to get way more interesting. Right now, the like 3 settings of like easy, intermediate, and like extreme is just not acceptable because a lot of the things that I want in a VR experience might have a really intense like creative or mathematical side of something, but not a physical. I don't want to be scared in that setting. So it's a really tough. It's a really tough dynamic to put that into a mild, medium, or like spicy, I guess would be the version. So like we need to start thinking about the different levels of ratings and how to actually break those down into maybe a few different categories where you could have one rating set here, one rating set there. I don't know the answer to who's going to be the one to start building that. I think that's a really fascinating question though. I need to think about that more.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, I was talking to Chris earlier about creating like a teacher's manual, because absolutely, not only do teachers need to know how to work the equipment, but the considerations that you're making are very important, obviously, when you're working with children. And I think that a guideline or a manuscript will be created. It's just a matter of time. And I think one thing that I said earlier with ethical considerations, I think those need to be, I think AltSpace VR originally didn't have any bots. I don't know what to call them, but if you notice, they had people in there, and then they started in those social platforms, they started increasing people's, because I actually myself, like, you can have negative experiences in VR and sometimes more easily because, anything goes. So I think what you're saying is very important, and I hope that those standards come to fruition soon.
And technically right now we don't have any regulation on whether or not parents can let their kids watch screens. And I think that's like the mommy bloggers have all sorts of like naysayers or pluses and minuses to why a television or an iPhone would be good or bad for your kid under a certain age. So I have a feeling that like a lot of parents are just going to start joining the discussion as well as this becomes more popular in deciding what's best for their kids and how they want to raise their kids. Because I do think under a certain age, like you aren't going to have regulatory control over whether or not you allow your kid to watch TV. And so that's just going to be kind of up to the parents and probably like the parental control. I mean, the parents are going to start writing those manuals and guides for how you bring a Vive into your house and what kind of parental control locks you put on it.
Great set of questions, and thank you very much, panelists, for all your answers and insight. Give them a round of applause.